The yard was strangely quiet when the announcement came. Morning sunlight slanted across the gravel, striking the rusted barbed wire that crowned the camp fence, making it glimmer like frost. The guards had gathered them together, dozens of women in faded uniforms, their hair tied back with scraps of cloth, their eyes marked by sleepless nights. The words were delivered in firm English, then translated into hesitant Japanese. "You are free at last. The war is over. You may return home." Freedom, spoken aloud, should have sounded like music. Instead, it fell like a stone into still water, rippling unease through the crowd. Some of the women shifted, clutching at each other's sleeves. Others lowered their gaze to the ground, where dust swirled around their bare ankles. Not one voice cheered. The American officers expected cries of relief, perhaps tears of joy, maybe even grateful bows. But the air held only silence, the kind of silence that feels like a refusal. Freedom had been offered, but it looked more like exile. For these Japanese women, nurses, clerks, wives of soldiers captured in the Pacific, the word home no longer carried warmth. Their homeland was in ruins. Tokyo was a skeleton city, Nagasaki a wound that still smoked, Osaka scattered with rubble. Reports filtered in through rumor and letters, each one worse than the last. No rice, no meat, families trading heirlooms for scraps of millet. To go back meant stepping into hunger, into humiliation, into streets where children begged and mothers sold their wedding kimonos for salt. Here, behind the camp fence, the world was safer, if not freer. It was a strange kind of irony. These women, prisoners of war, had grown healthier within captivity than their families had outside it. Their cheeks had color again, their bodies no longer gaunt. The Americans had fed them bread, beans, coffee that smelled foreign and bitter but warm. Some had even been offered chocolate, small brown squares that melted on the tongue like a forbidden dream. A woman named Keiko still remembered the first bite, the sweetness almost unbearable after years of rationing. "I thought," she whispered once to another, "this must be what peace tastes like." Now peace was being handed to them not as a flavor, but as a command. Go home. Yet home no longer resembled safety. It was a place of ashes and loss, where families whispered about surrender as if it were a crime, where women returned branded by shame, accused of dishonoring themselves by being taken alive. Behind these walls, they were prisoners. Beyond them, they would be traitors. One of the officers, a tall colonel with sunburned cheeks, waited for their reaction. He cleared his throat, repeating the words louder, as if volume could change meaning. "You are free. You can leave." His tone carried impatience, almost disbelief. Freedom, he thought, was the dream of every captive. But dreams, like mirrors, can crack when held to the light. In the group stood Yumi, once a nurse in a field hospital in the Philippines. She had seen men die in rows, their bodies stacked like cordwood, the stench of blood and infection clinging to her skin. Here, in the camp, she had scrubbed kitchens instead of wounds. She hated the chores, but they were nothing compared to the screams of the wounded. The memory pressed against her chest like a stone. If she returned to Japan, she would face hospitals again, shortages, the endless labor of survival. For the first time in years, she felt fed, even safe. The thought of leaving made her throat ache. Around her, murmurs began to spread. A few women dared to lift their heads. Keiko spoke first, voice trembling. "Please do not send us back." Her Japanese words were hurried, but another prisoner translated them for the colonel. The officer frowned, as if he had misheard. The women nodded, voices rising, repeating the plea. "We want to stay." The colonel blinked, his jaw tightening. To him, the request was absurd, almost comical. Who begged for captivity? Yet their faces told a story his mind struggled to grasp. Captivity had become refuge, the walls a shield from a harsher world beyond. The guards exchanged glances, some even smirking at the strangeness of it. One muttered under his breath, "We open the gate, and no one walks out." The absurdity lightened the tension, a ripple of humor against the tide of despair. But for the women, there was nothing funny. Their fear was not the fear of prison, but of freedom itself. In their eyes, the camp was no longer just barbed wire and barracks. It was a place where hunger was tamed, where dignity was oddly preserved, where the future felt less threatening than the ruins awaiting them across the sea. The chains of captivity had quietly transformed into threads of protection, fragile but real. As the sun climbed higher, the colonel folded his hands behind his back, unsettled. He could order them out. He could demand obedience. Yet he saw how they clung to one another, desperate not to be torn from the safety of their prison. What kind of freedom was it, he wondered, if it left people begging for the comfort of their chains? The silence thickened again, broken only by the distant clang of the mess hall bell. The smell of bread drifted through the yard, warm and yeasty. Some women turned their faces toward it instinctively, as if the scent itself was proof of what they feared losing. Freedom was a word. Bread was survival. The colonel finally nodded to his men, signaling the assembly was over. The gates remained open, but no one moved. The women drifted back toward the barracks, shoulders hunched, voices hushed. In the shadow of freedom, they chose the safety of captivity. And yet, this was only the beginning. What came after would reveal just how far the paradox could stretch. When prison walls began to look more like home, and the word freedom became the heaviest burden of all. The camp kitchen hissed with steam as metal pots clattered, filling the air with the scent of bread and boiled beans. For the women who lined up with tin bowls in their hands, the smell was more intoxicating than perfume. Beyond the fences, across an ocean, Japan struggled with famine, its people scraping weeds from fields and mixing acorns into flour. Inside the camp, the irony was almost unbearable. The prisoners ate more steadily than their own children. And that cruel, comforting paradox tightened the chains of choice around their hearts. Keiko lingered at the end of the line, her bowl cradled to her chest. She was only 25, but war had aged her features. In Japan, she would have been expected to marry, to serve a husband, to rebuild a home out of ashes. Here, she was only expected to survive, and survival was suddenly simple. 3 meals a day, a bed, walls that kept out the chaos of a ruined world. She had tasted chocolate once, a gift from a kind guard, and that sweetness haunted her dreams. Freedom, she thought, could never be so sweet. Yumi, the former nurse, had become something like a leader among the women. Her voice carried calm authority, her presence reassuring. She translated the guards' orders, negotiated for extra rations when someone was sick, and coaxed frightened newcomers into routine. In another life, she might have been a teacher or a doctor. Here, she was a bridge, but beneath her composed exterior lay dread. She had read letters smuggled from Japan. Families desperate, people bartering for potatoes, diseases spreading in the ruins of hospitals. She knew what awaited them if they left, and so she buried her fear in discipline, teaching the others how to keep their resolve when the Americans once again pressed them to go. The camp itself had transformed into a strange imitation of community. The Americans, perhaps out of boredom, introduced small diversions. Music played from gramophones, sewing groups to mend uniforms, even lessons in English. At first, the women participated stiffly, wary of propaganda. But over time, they laughed at mispronounced words, stitched floral patterns into coarse cloth, clapped in rhythm to unfamiliar songs. It was not freedom, but it was life. They were still captives, but for the first time in years, life contained slivers of choice and slivers of joy. One evening, after supper, the colonel who oversaw the camp made his rounds. He was a practical man, uneasy with sentiment, but even he noticed how the women sat in circles, murmuring softly like neighbors rather than prisoners. Their barracks glowed with lantern light, a fragile warmth against the vast American night. "They've made this place their home," he muttered, half to himself, half in disbelief. To his soldiers, it was an absurdity. To the women, it was survival written into the shape of daily ritual. Yet the looming conflict never loosened. The Americans wanted to close camps, to send prisoners back. Every few weeks, the order came again: prepare for departure. Each time, the women resisted with quiet pleas. Some clasped their hands and bowed low, tears streaking their cheeks. Others stood firm, voices shaking with defiance. "Do not send us back." The colonel reported their refusal to his superiors, who responded with impatience. But his tone grew more hesitant each time, as though he, too, began to understand that what awaited them outside was not liberation, but another kind of prison. Keiko began to change most visibly. She had been timid when first captured, but captivity gave her strength. She led songs in the evenings, her voice thin but steady. She spoke of her family in Tokyo with longing, yet confessed to Yumi in whispers that she feared reuniting with them. "I am ashamed," she said, eyes downcast. "They will not see a daughter, only a failure who lived while others died." Yumi did not contradict her. Shame was a weapon sharper than wire. The paradox grew unbearable when rumors of transfers spread, ships waiting to carry prisoners back to Japan. Panic rippled through the women. Some clung to doorframes as if the wooden planks themselves could shield them. Others declared they would starve themselves before boarding. One woman fainted, overcome by terror at the idea of returning to streets lined with ghosts. In the colonel's office, the pleas grew more desperate. "We will work for you," Yumi said firmly, her Japanese translated by another. "We will cook, we will clean, anything, but please let us stay." The colonel stared at her, silent. His world was built on orders, chains of command, the clear lines between victor and vanquished. Yet here was a plea that shattered those lines, a request that sounded less like desperation and more like conviction. He found himself unable to answer, because there was no rulebook for captives begging to remain captives. That night, the camp was restless. The women whispered long after lights out, voices braided with fear. Keiko sat by the window, watching the moon silver the barbed wire. She touched the scar on her wrist, a reminder of the past, and thought of the future like a chasm waiting to swallow her. Beyond the fence lay freedom, but also famine, ruin, and dishonor. Within the fence lay captivity, but also shelter, food, and fragile dignity. She whispered to herself the words she dared not shout. This prison is safer than the world. The next morning, the gates were opened again. Sunlight poured in, bright and pitiless. The women stood together, hands clasped, hearts pounding. The guards waited for them to walk out, but no one moved. Instead, Yumi stepped forward, her voice clear. "We remain." It was a moment both defiant and tragic, a chorus of souls choosing the walls of a camp over the vastness of freedom. The colonel felt the weight of history pressing into his skin, for he knew he was witnessing a truth no commander wished to admit. Sometimes the open gate is the most terrifying sight of all. Which city are you watching our video from? For more powerful stories from World War II, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.